Stream. I am Matty Dalrymple. I am the new campaigns manager for ALLi. And if you're not familiar with the campaigns concept, it means that I'm responsible for managing ALLi's efforts around self-publishing for all, ethical self-publishing, open up to indie authors, and Self-Pub 3. And I was actually just recently on the ALLi podcast with Orna talking about some of those things, getting information from Orna as much as I was sharing information about those things, since I'm still fairly new. I just joined ALLi at the end of April. Ethan, welcome to the live stream. And I think it would be fun to just start out by finding out from you a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your agency.
Sure. I've been in professional publishing my entire career. I worked for Berkeley and Bantam. The agency's been in existence for more than 35 years. We do a lot of commercial fiction. We do some kids' books and a lot of sub-rights now, including for indies. And it's a full-service agency that handles all the opportunities and dilemmas that authors have.
Cool. And let's talk a little bit generically before we get to some of the more specific questions about why would ALLi be allying itself with an agent? I mean, I think a lot of people, especially who are sort of earlier in their author careers, would think, well, you know, I thought I was becoming an indie, so I didn't have to worry about agents. So talk a little bit about what that relationship is about.
Well, there are different elements of it. The primary element is that indies not necessarily want to or able to exploit all their rights. They're rights that you will generate from the book, which is the centerpiece of your career and your creative life, that you can't or won't exploit. So if you're publishing as an indie, there's translation rights, there's audio rights, there's game rights, there's movie rights. There are all these other literally businesses. And it's very hard to enter those businesses. Audio is more possible. Translation is a little possible. Then you get into areas like film and game, et cetera, that are really not quite possible, really. So it's a way to exploit the full spectrum of the potential financial, creative value of your book and your books. So that's the biggest part is rights. But also there are hybrid careers where you want to migrate some of your work into traditional publishing, and you are interested in what that would look like. And then depending on the nature of the label, when we start working with people, we'll advise them on other things. I mean, not everything is a commissionable event. Once you're a client of ours, we're happy to help you with everything. And it's reversion, it's copyright, it's book boxes. There's any number of things that enter into an author's career. So all these things go into it. And it's an extremely complex business. So occasionally you may want or need someone who has deep roots in the traditional side and a lot of knowledge about the whole, everything that goes into being a successful author.
Yeah, I really liked one of the things you said sort of highlights something that's becoming clearer and clearer to me as an indie author, that it is not an either or. You know, I think for a long time people thought I'm either going to pursue a traditional career or I'm going to choose an indie path. And then they'd made the decision, and that was pretty much it. But I think, as you mentioned, there's so many people who are looking per work, not per career. So, you know, somebody who's doing very well in indie publishing, like I can think of Pamela Fagan Hutchins, might see an opportunity to ally themselves with a traditional publisher like Bookouture and pursue that, or obviously traditionally published authors are seeing the benefits of indie and doing that for particular works. And also the idea of even for one work, you have different ways of slicing and dicing it, you know, by market or by media and by time. So yeah, it gets very complex very quickly and very hard for any individual author to keep on top of all of it.
Well, I think rights is a key thing. I mean, most likely you are not going to exploit all the rights yourself. So once you decide you need to license, then you have to think about, can I license on my own, or do I need somebody to license with help? Also, authors have traditionally published books. So you have a whole other part of your career if you are a post-traditional or a author that includes traditional properties. Then you get into the whole revert and republish area. what's in my contract? Can I improve my royalties? Can I revert individual rights? So that's a whole other part of the business, which is the traditional author's portfolio of prior published books. What do I do with that? Some authors come to us with 10, 20, 30 books. And that's, they're not indie published. They have a partner. They need to look at that financial relationship and their ability to exploit the rights and manage those books.
Yeah, I think that is a great entree to one of the questions we had gotten, which is from Tracy. And Tracy asked, does being prolific hurt or help when it comes to interesting an agent in marketing your subrights? I have over 200 books under 3 different pen names. 35 of them were originally trad published. I got all the rights back. I learned from their trad publishing world that agents are generally anchored into that if you write fast, your books are automatically assumed to be of lesser quality and cranked out. But prolificacy, I had to practice saying that before. Prolificacy in indie publishing is a survival skill. So I'm wondering how that translates when you approach an agent about subrights.
Well, the key thing is always the book and the career. The metrics vary across genre, across author. When we size up the potential for a book, we look at the absolute specifics. What do we think of this book? How commercial is it? How well done is it? What its true potential is? So it's really, we judge on an individual basis. I think there's a slight, tiny prejudice that's residual from the world of traditional publishing, that if you pour it out, it's less good. But I don't think that's relevant to this discussion. The authors who wrote Harlequins for years often wrote 3, 4, and 5 books a year. That was not unusual for someone writing category romance at the 60,000 word level. So that's not unusual. In fact, that's kind of good. The real issue is, of that portfolio, what has value, what can be exploited? And this is a very mixed bag. The audio publishers have different prerequisites. Translation has different prerequisites. Translation is probably the best example I can give. When we look at a book, we know what is selling where. Let's take science fiction, for instance. There are countries that simply don't buy it. So we have to look at a book and say, who will buy this science fiction novel in translation? So we know it's Russia, it's Germany, it's France, it's Italy, and that was what the potential is. And there's a little bit of potential in Korea, Japan, China. But there are places where the books have no interest. And you could go through each genre and you can make the same assessment. There are books that we know will not sell in a specific country. So you make those judgments. I think, and I always feel some trepidation saying this, but it really is talent driven. And it's really what makes your book special, what makes your story special. That's why, I always say 90-10, 90% of your effort in creative and creating great stories, 10% in the business side of it, because the cream does rise. And it's also important to remember what that means. Different genres, different authors bring different things. A book that you may find of absolutely no interest may be a book that somebody enjoys immensely. And you have to keep that in mind. There's no single standard, and genres rise and fall. Romantasy is very big now. Action adventure doesn't exist anymore. Westerns are very small compared to what they were 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. So it's really a matter of actualizing your talent, finding where you fit, and then, like everybody else, like any talent-driven business, you're rolling the dice. Whether you are an amateur sports person or someone who plays chess, you're in a highly competitive commercial world with very few rules that have to do mainly with your talent and your ability to stick to it and to be professional.
I'm interested in that 90-10. I think that probably got a lot of people's attention, because I think that, indie authors are used to feeling like a huge chunk of their time has to be spent on something other than the creation of the work. Do you think that that's the primary service that an agency like yours can offer, to offload some of that work that indies are maybe doing themselves so they can focus on the creative process?
Well, yeah, listen, I'm in the minority here, and I know that. I mean, but I will stick to my beliefs. The book is the thing. I mean, I don't know how much I can possibly stress that. I think indies are under a tremendous pressure to be 50-50. to put 20 hours a week in the writing, 20 hours in the marketing and this and that. And I understand that, and I think it has validity. I'm not knocking that as a strategy. But my bigger point is that it's the truly successful books that carry the wave, that will carry you, that there's a limit to what promotion marketing can do. Real, price-driven stuff, that kind of thing makes sense, and I'm not knocking it at all. I'm just saying that there has to be that fundamental basis, which is a really exciting book, the really beautifully written book, a book that really hits the heartstrings. So if you're neglecting that, all the marketing in the world's not going to help you. And so that's why I'm not a 50-50 in my advice. I'm a 90-10. That's my point of view. And I know that's what I look for. As far as what an agent can do, I mean, the biggest thing really is on the licensing side. You could sit there and say, I'm going to license audio, I'm going to license translation, I'm going to license film, game, TV. I'm going to handle every query I get. You can say, you know what, this is a mistake. I'm going to get an agent that handles licensing. I'm going to write. The agent's going to handle every single query I get, and I'm going to manage my indie account at 5, 10, 15 hours a week tops, and I'm going to succeed that way. I'm just offering a paradigm for a strategic approach that I personally support.
Yeah, I had just recently signed up with DropCap for international rights to explore international rights. And it was interesting because, they have a Q&A that's FAQ that says like, what can I do to improve my my ability to capitalize on international rights. And basically they were saying, well, write good books and get people to review them, package them professionally. It wasn't like research what's going on in France. It was very much focused on the content, which I think is in line with what you're saying.
Well, the English language books are followed very strongly by the international book scene. It's really an Anglo market into the rest of the world for the most part. Not 100% clearly, more like 80-20. But when you go to Frankfurt, which we do every year, the interest is the Anglo books. It's the English language books, and that's most of the traffic. American and British publishers do buy from French, Italian, German, authors, etc. But that is a much smaller part of the business currently. That's changing, and it will change. And there's been a shift since I entered the business in international authors reaching the world stage in a very positive way. But the business is still oriented around the English-speaking market. If you look at international bestseller lists, you will always see books that originated in the language of English.
Interesting. I'm going to take a look at another one of the questions we got. This was from Anne. Anne says, I have self-published 9 books in a series, all standalone, but linked with new characters and old. I've been told by readers they would make a good TV series. And the latest one would be an ideal remake of the classic movie which inspired it. I would also like to look at translation to French, but where to start? I've been told I need an agent, but how do I attract an agent for film, TV, and translation rights?
Well, translation is doable because there are agents. Most agencies will take a indie author that has translation rights with potential. Film and TV are a completely different story. And honestly, I have to be candid and not be encouraging. It's really another world. It's very much a closed world. There's very few films and TV series even being made. And in a crassest sense, they have to find you. The odds of there are about 6 agents in Hollywood that are called book-to-film agents. And they represent authors and look for film deals. We have one of them. Getting a person like that at all is extremely difficult. Getting a person like that to actually pay attention to you and market your work over years is even more difficult. So it's more like, frankly, waiting for that email to come and being discovered. But there are 6 of those agents, and you can find them through a diligent internet search, and you can approach them. But I have to be, again, very candid. The odds are astronomically difficult in getting it. Hollywood is a closed shop in many ways. If they're only making, 125 theatrical films a year and 300 cable films and streaming platform films, you're talking about, it's not even a percent. It's really kismet that leads to the creation of these properties. So I really would not pursue this. Translation, I would recommend pursuing. I would not recommend trying to find a film agent unless you're absolutely certain of it, or you have the time and the energy to pursue it.
One thing that I learned, I think I understand, and you can elaborate on this, is that every once in a while I would encounter an author who said their work had been optioned for a movie, and everybody would be very excited about that. But can you describe a little bit what that means, and what the likelihood is that that even in that situation, a work would go on to become a movie or a TV series?
Sure. Well, this is one of the key frustrations in the entire process. The way the business works is there are two ways that people that acquire film properties start. One is called the option agreement. And the option agreement is a contract that you sign for 1, 2, or 3 years with $0 to a lot of money, where they have the right to make the movie. And under the rubric of the option, which again is a legally binding contract, they are supposed to do the due diligence and get money and talent and perhaps set it up with a studio. So that is a formal agreement, the option agreement. Another kind of agreement at the beginning of the process is called the shopping agreement. A shopping agreement is a little more loosey-goosey. It's often with no money. It could be for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and usually there's no money in it. And the shopping agreement is very different from the option. The option has fixed terms usually, where they say that if we make the movie, you get $100,000 in this. Shopping agreements normally provide that the shopper goes out and tries to land a deal, and the two parties in the agreement make their own deals. In other words, the shopper is often a producer, director, actor even, and they look to find a deal. Inside the shopping agreement is the author's right to make their own deal with that acquiring entity. So let's make believe Paramount Pictures buys the property from Mr. Shopping Director, and there's a clause that says, and you will acquire the rights directly from the author. And then you're in a negotiation, you're tied at the hip on this, where you negotiate your own deal inside the rubric of the shopping agreement. So here's where the frustration comes in. 99% of the books that are optioned are never made into anything. I mean, I'm not saying that's a precise number, but that number tells the full story. And that means that they're never made. Hollywood pays hundreds of thousands of dollars at times in option fees, and they don't make the movie. And this is the way it is. Like a large studio will have a portfolio of option properties, and over 1 and 5 and 10 years, they will decide what they're going to make. And they're also subject to fads. So if horror movies are hot, they'll buy 10 horror novels. And if romantasy is hot, they'll buy 5 romantasy novels. But when and if they actually make them is a whole other story. I've had a property that optioned for 8 years that they put hundreds of thousands of dollars in, that they basically told us they're not going to make the movie. So you get these, quote, horror stories where, there's this giant investment which doesn't turn into the finished product. And there's very good reasons why. An inexpensive comedy is a $40 million proposition. The big budget stuff that you see on the streaming platforms and in theatrical release are $1 and $150 and $200 million properties. So when a studio decides they're going to, quote, make something, if you're at the top of the market, if you've got a big thriller, if you've got a big SF, big fantasy, big whatever, they're talking about an insanely gigantic investment, which is why it doesn't happen. If they've got 10 of those, they're not making 10 of them, they're making 1 of them, and 9 of them go by the boards.
Yeah. I'm just taking a look in the chat. I saw that one of the participants, Ken, had said, I'm interested in an agreement that is formed between I'm interested in the type of agreement that is formed between an agent and an author. Is there an existing template? And Kaylee pointed out that there are some sample contracts that are available to ALLi members. But can you talk a little bit about like what that agreement between an agent and an author usually looks like?
Yeah, they usually give the agent, at least a year to shop stuff. It'll specify the commissions. It'll specify what properties are within the agency agreement and which aren't. And it's basically a pretty simple formal handshake on what the agent can do and can't. There's usually a termination clause. There's not a lot of controversy in these contracts. They should be scrupulously, monitored for having just the bare bones and no more. But that's really it. You agree to operate for X amount of time with these properties under this commission structure, and this way to terminate it. And that's basically bare bones, and bare bones is good in this situation.
It does seem like it's an important nuance there to recognize that this is not something like you're going to sign a contract with an agent and the next month, suddenly the offers are going to start flowing, and that it's a longer term commitment and a longer term relationship in most cases.
Well, it is very much so, because in order to, translation is a good example. It takes, a week, a month or more to put a property on sale. And what that means is, like, when we do it, we will put together a sales package and we send it to all of our co-agents in all the major markets. And then we have to wait for them to distribute it to their publishers and go through the buying process. So figure 2 weeks to get it to the French agent. French agent gets it out, and then the French agent has to wait a month or 3 or 6 before all 10 of her French publishers respond to that submission. And then you have to negotiate a contract, and then you have to agree on the terms, then you have to sign the contract, and you have to wait to get paid, then you have to wait for the book to get translated and published. So there are multi-year elements to this that are that have to be, because it's the nature of what you're doing when you go into translation. Translation
is something that I have intentionally always backburnered early on, just because I didn't feel like messing with all the logistical challenges of pursuing it myself. I wasn't really familiar with what the translation agent situation was. But it's interesting now with AI, and now I'm just expressing my own personal opinion, not an opinion, not the official ALLi opinion necessarily. But I do think that one of the real boons of AI is that it's going to enable translations, for example, that would never happen if we were relying on human translators, because they're just, a billion books and only so many translators. So do you see the eventual availability of AI generated translations as changing the landscape of translation licensing rights?
I don't really have an opinion. AI is objected to by a lot of people. It's unclear to me if an AI translation is as good as a translation done by a person. It's unclear to me how acceptable they'll be. There's also the issue in audio, where there is an attempt to create AI-generated audio that some people say are good, some people say are not good. I really will have to just see how the market responds. Clearly, there is the potential to have many more books put into audiobook or translated if these technologies prove to be acceptable to the consumer. But I just don't have enough information to have an opinion.
Yeah, I do think that I can see a scenario where what happens is that there will be an inexpensive AI option, either translation or an audiobook, and then there will be the more premium priced human translation or audiobook, and hopefully that will serve many purposes and not be taking jobs away from the people. I know that I provide AI narration for my nonfiction books, but I still pay my wonderful audiobook narrator for the fiction books, because she can do things that a machine is just not able to do right now.
Well, one of the really interesting things about audio that surprised me was the passion that people feel for the narrators of individual properties. It's almost like half the equation is who's actually narrating the book, which I did not anticipate and was quite surprised by. But we've seen it emerge early in the game that people would read everything by their favorite narrator. You care about that almost as much or more than the book, which is extremely fascinating. And it's really become a real dominant element in audiobooks, that the reader is an actor, a performer, and the performance is key. When we sample audiobook narrators, we've done this in conjunction with our publisher partners. We've listened to people we thought were horrible, frankly, and I didn't want to hear this person's voice. And these are for big books. And other people thought, wow, that person really captured this book. This is great. This is Shakespeare in a voice. So again, you always get surprised in a good way by people's talent and by technology. And audio narration is one of the more interesting areas that prove that what the performance of an audiobook is key to its success.
Yeah, I know I'm one of those audiobook listeners who occasionally come across a narrator I love, and then pretty soon I'm listening to mysteries and how-to books and romance. And, yeah, I will definitely follow an audiobook narrator if I like them. And not surprisingly, the question about AI generated some chat there. But Antoinette asked, are most agents familiar with translation, or do you need to specify that in a search? Do you need to look for an agent who specializes in translation?
Well, it's a very good question. There are all kinds of agents at all different stages of their career with all kinds of expertise, all kinds of interest. So yes, you should really make sure that the agent or the agency is in the rights business and has been for a number of years, if possible, has a full string of co-agents in all the foreign markets, and is very much in that business, because it takes time to build all this up. We've built it over many years, and you definitely want an agent who actively sells translation, hopefully attends Frankfurt or London everywhere, has the co-agents in place, has done deals, and you should definitely ask that. Of course, you could get an agent whose main interest is selling to U.S. publishers or British publishers and is less versed in translation, and that is not what you want if your goal is to sell translation.
We have another translation question. What is the process for translation when subsidiary rights are sold? And what would you advise an author who has a book in a genre that is not one of the successful self-publishing genres? Mine is of a type that is more often trade published, not a romance, no HEA. I'm sorry, I don't know what HEA means. Happily ever after. Thank you. Can such a book succeed in the self-publishing world, in your opinion? I guess specific to translation. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I don't know if I fully understand the question, but just in general, authors are publishing their own translations, and some of them quite successfully. So that is a area that is doable, and you can publish translations. You can hire a translator. They are not inexpensive, but you can hire a translator. You can enter a market. We have indie people that we have relationships with or represent some of their business that are publishing in translation in major foreign markets. So it's certainly doable. The metrics in each of these countries is similar but different. So you need to decide, if you're going to commission a translation in Germany, you need to make sure as best you can that this is something that the German market will consider. And Italy, Japan, Korea, whatever you want to name. I mean, again, you need to have some sense that these books have potential in those markets. And that's a big question. I mean, you don't always know that. Finding that out is quite hard to do. But the goal of any translation will be to at least break even, at least make your costs back. So those are very complex, serious decisions that you have to make.
I spoke to, this was long ago on my podcast, I think it was Emma Prince, who was having great success with historical Scottish romance in Germany. And we were chatting about that for a while, and I said, do you put like Scottish phraseology in your books, like, oh, I didn't ken the wee lassie or whatever? And she said, oh yeah, I do that. And I said, how do they translate that into German? She said, that's a good question. I don't know what they're doing with that. But all those things that as an English reader you would expect to see if someone was sort of creating the ambiance of historical Scotland in the way they knew their readers wanted to read, that she had no idea what that looked like in German. And that would be like,
it speaks to the heart of the AI question: is can any of these programs approximate the skill that a talented, sophisticated translator brings to the table? You are competing against native speakers in their native language, in their native land, against native authors. So if the translation is some kind of rickety, bare bones kind of thing, I'm not sure why they would read that when they can get all kinds of books by their favorite native language writers. So I don't. Again, if it's technologically emerges, that's a different question. But even so, they'll be competing against humans who really know what they are doing.
Yeah, I can imagine that AI will be effective for translations much sooner for like pretty straightforward nonfiction books than it would be for more nuanced fictional works. Um, let's see. I got a question from Doreen, who says, when one submits a manuscript to an agent for review, should it have been perfected through an editor before submission? Or will the publisher provide an editor if the manuscript is accepted?
Well, it depends if we're talking about trying to find a traditional deal or make a first sale of some kind, the book that you send to any agent should be at the highest level of creation. You need to, if you want to land the agent, we look at books that, in our view, are flawed or need work, and we'll say that. But your goal is to send a book to someone and say, yeah, this is ready to go. I want to shop this. So you really want to have a book in extremely high level of creation ready to go. Will it be, we do some developmental editing, which is where we start saying, it's great, but the ending doesn't work for me, or this character is very weak. We don't edit, but we developmental edit, which is it's a big subject in and of itself. And we only will put a book on sale if we think it's ready to go. Now, I'm talking about originals now into the trad market. When we get books from indies, they are published books. I don't believe the only manuscripts we've ever shopped are manuscripts from established authors who, they're foreign publishers. I want to see it as soon as possible. If it's being published in September of 24, I want to see the manuscript as soon as it's ready. You could send it to me in May of 24. So, I would say just in general, you have to show work that's at a very high level, ready to go. In traditional publishing, you need to be ready to land a editor who will buy it for a publishing house. And in the translation audio market, basically you're selling a finished book. You're really not working on a book that the audio publisher is going to say, hey, I want to fix this or that. Audio originals are different. Audio originals are books produced by audio publishers that are first and only. But that is very different from most of the audio market, which is basically reprints into audio from a published book.
Yeah, ALLi asks, did he just say that indies can take an already published book to an agent? So I think that the answer would be, it depends on what kind of agent you're taking it to. That in the case of the kind of work you're doing, yes, you would expect to get already published work, but in other circumstances, like if someone who was pursuing a traditional publishing deal, you would not be doing that. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I want to be very clear. We're talking about two very different things now in a very profound way. Like rights licensing, that's key. It's a key element here. Rights licensing is when you have a book that is most likely published or to be published that you're looking to sell rights off of. That book is finished. That book is complete. That book is published. If you have a manuscript which is unpublished and you're looking to land a traditional publisher or a small press or a mid-sized press, that is a manuscript. That's not a published book. There's a fork in the road here. And you're talking about two very different commercial endeavors.
Yep. Let me see what other questions we have here. So Janine says, I've received an offer for Korean rights for one of my books. Even with an offer, it seems like it is not easy to find a rights agent. So where can I find information on how to best negotiate on my own? I'd like to know about typical royalty rates, how the royalty rates are calculated, net, et cetera, typical advances, and so on for specific countries.
Well, I think the rights agents are out there. The Association of Authors Representatives in the United States has a database where agents list what they like and do, so there's that. I think if you do some serious due diligence on the internet, you should be able to find rights agents. As far as educating yourself into actually being a deal maker, that is a much higher mountain to climb. You're not going to find what royalties people are offering that quickly. There are books out there. There are probably some gurus on the internet, etc. But you're talking about kind of self-educating yourself. That would take some effort.
That's the advantage of groups like yours. One thing I've been hearing a lot about is print-only licenses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, print-only is extremely hard to secure. There are the big five. There's one publisher we spoke to a month ago that said they will not do a print-only deal. There's a publisher that we recently did a print-only deal. There are a couple of publishers that said they would consider a print-only deal, but mainly by acquiring the backlist of a very successful author and then getting to do their original works themselves. So it exists. It's very, very, very hard to get. We think it's ideal. We hope that it grows in the future. And the reason why we think it's ideal is if you're able to retain your ebook income without a publisher partner taking the lion's share, to be blunt, and you can get a print deal where you could be fully distributed into print, into retail, big accounts without having designed the book, paid anything into it, and get full exposure in retail. That is almost the best of both worlds. I mean, you're in print with a large publisher that is handling everything and paying you a royalty or a profit share, and you're retaining your ebook. That we would love to see that be a new paradigm. We're not there yet, and it's only for the absolute, cream of the cream when a publisher will actually do a deal like that.
The flavor of that question that I'm interested in personally is audiobooks, because I have audio of all my fiction works. I'm super happy with the narrator, but I feel like I fall down because the whole promotion of audiobooks is a thing unto itself. I think quite different than ebooks. Are there more opportunities for people to be signing audio-only rights?
Well, audio is a vital market, and you can enter that in many ways. There are 6 or so large audio publishers. They're very approachable. We license to them all the time. We hold auctions for audio rights with them, best bid auctions, etc. So that is very much an open door for indies. There are 2 areas where audio is fraught. The first area is any traditional deal, the publishers insist on getting audio. We don't like this. We think it's not in the author's interest financially. But in order to secure a print deal, most of the time, almost all the time, you have to give up audio, which means, and ebook for that matter, which means that the traditional publisher is capturing the financial potential of all 3 of those formats, print, ebook, and audio, and paying them what their standard rates are. That is dramatically not the income shares that indies see. So there's that. The other area where audio is fraught, in our view, is the businesses tend to be very much platform businesses where promotion and marketing is very sparse and not particularly effective. Basically, they're putting out the edition. It's available for sale. Your fans and customers will buy it, but not much is going on. And that's something you just have to live with audio. It's not as well promoted as it might be. Though I have to say it's a chronic problem for all the publishing formats. It's unclear how much effort, what kind of effort, how much money should be spent in promotion. But audio, I think, has some unique issues where the platform businesses are doing just so much and no more. The exception to that is when they buy you at a fairly high level. They will run very big and successful campaigns for successful authors, and that's a whole other story. But for the average indie author, I think audio is essential. I think no matter what, you want to be in 3 formats. I mean, this is an absolute gospel-y kind of thing. When you publish a book, you must be in print, you must be in ebook, you must be in audio. You don't know where your customers and fans are. You want them to enter through any of those 3 doors, and you really want to have that in place.
I'm happy to hear that perspective, because I was speaking to someone who brings a very mathematical cost-benefit analysis to all her books, and she would say, I spent this much to create an ebook, I made this much money, that's good. I spent this much to make a print book, I made this much money, that's acceptable. I spent this much money to make audio, I got this back. And she was kind of making it on a book by book basis, like, am I or am I not going to make an audio book for the next book based on the ROI I've received from audiobooks in the past. And it was really kind of an eye-opening perspective to me, because I always thought of it as a package. It's like just like a package of content that you provide, and then you look at it across all the media. And I realized that, a strict adherence to either one of those is probably not ideal. You need to factor them both in. But I do like the idea of being able to say, people say, oh, I only listen to audio. And I was like, you know what? I've got you covered.
Well, yeah, there are a couple of things. One of the reasons for licensing audio is it costs you nothing. If you land the deal, that entire expense and management of that entire account is off the table. That's one of the best reasons to do it. If you're going to self-publish your own very modest audio edition with not a great narrator and something you've not been able to monitor or promote, makes more sense to license. So that's important of it. And the other part of that conversation is amortization and faith in your career. Over time, you hope to build a valuable backlist. You're not looking at, no author's really looking at individual books, really. I mean, you may have a hit, but what you're really trying to do is build a portfolio of financially valuable books. And so you can't really say when lightning's going to strike or how well it's going to do. In the old days of print only, mystery writers were built a book at a time. The first book was bought for $1,000 and they sold 1,500 copies. And then they bought the next book for $2,000 and they sold 2,000 copies. And then they booked the next book for $5,000, they bought 4,000 copies. And then eventually, you could be Agatha Christie. I mean, this is the true paradigm that is really what all genre authors are wedded to. This is really what it's about. And not unusual in the nonfiction book world too. Cookbook author is going to write 10 cookbooks in the course of a lifetime. And you hope that the new buyer goes back and buys the old book. So yesterday's flop is tomorrow's backlist. And that's an important way to look at it. Because I don't mind anybody who approaches things with that very, very tight metric data-based approach. I think that's fine. Whatever suits you. But just in addition to that, there are other approaches that are based more on some version of building a career, looking at the books as a set and not as individual investments.
Yeah. That's a nice entree to another question, which is what options, I think that ALLi probably has a lot of members who have been traditionally published and now they're interested in exploring indie options. What options might a traditionally published author have if their books are languishing and they want to regain the rights in order to, try to give them that second life?
Well, this is a really big thing. This is really how I entered the indie world. When Amazon first started Kindle, and we heard they were paying a 70% royalty, we got very interested very quickly. I would even say we were one of the early adapters of this initiative and this potential. So when we saw that, we began to revert as many books as we can immediately that were basically dead wood at our many, many traditional publishers. And our motto was revert and republish. And that remains our motto. And we have about 350 to 400 books that the agency has republished in Kindle to actualize this strategy. And we did it as a service to the authors, taking our standard commission. And we found it to be a gigantic success. So romance, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, we were sending out 20 reversion letters a week, and we were getting a lot of stuff back without a problem. Then we were getting stuff back with a problem, and then we got into lots of fights as the publishers caught on that we were reverting books that had value. And then they began to be much more difficult and starchy about reversion. Now it's a mixed bag. We get a lot of books back. When a publisher, they're basically decent people. I certainly never want to give the impression that we're dealing with, Simon Whiplash or something. When they have a book that they realize is really kind of dead, many times they'll just give it back to you. It's not a problem. And you should republish, period. This is a strategy that every traditional author must pursue, in my opinion. And then there are books that are on the cusp, and that's trickier. And there are books, they're selling a couple of hundred copies. They're not entitled to reversion, and they say no. And, we cry, and they, it's tough on us. They believe that they have a sunk cost in publishing, which is absolutely true. They won't give them back. We think we could do more with them than they will. But there you have it. That's a dilemma. And over time, we hope they either go out of print and we'll snatch them back and republish, or we'll live with the royalties we make, or who knows what.
One of the questions we got from Gregory, this is right up my alley, but Gregory asks, you mentioned 3 formats being important, but what about short stories in print, meaning standalone short stock collections? And so for the purpose, I have all sorts of opinions about this, but for the purposes of this conversation, do you see rights opportunities for short fiction?
Not really. You know, short fiction is really not what book people do per se. There are lots of anthologies out there, and some of them are translated, some of them are taken into audio. But short fiction, in and of itself, is a different market. There are all the fanzines, webzines, magazines that do it, and they're out there. But it's really not what goes on at Frankfurt or London. It's really not an audio translation thing. When you sell a first novel in any of the genres, most likely it's not a short story collection. Sometimes it is, but most editors will say they just don't sell. They just don't sell compared to a first novel. And that's what we all have to live with.
Yep. We have a question from Russell who says, if I want to find a rights agent for an as yet unpublished YA historical adventure series that has a big French angle, do I need to get it translated before I seek that rights agent?
Well, again, you know, when you write that query letter, you have to convince that rights agent that what you have is ready to go, viable, commercially able book. And if it's unpublished, unless you're a very successful author, there's no reason why they should, quote, believe that. There's nothing to go on. You know, what really drives the translation market are three things. One is sales figures. The translation agents and the publishers say, wow, that book was a hit in America, we're interested, or England. The other thing that drives it is reviews. A very well-reviewed book is interesting to other countries. And the final thing is really list placements. If you hit book lists, the Times, USA Today, that interests them. So those three things are the dressing that really makes a book look, pick me up, buy me, translate me. And all the other things, our agent partners and our editor partners in foreign countries, they're readers and they fall in love with books too, and they'll buy a book. But often those three things are present: good sales, good reviews, list placements, and buzz. And so that's what does it. A unpublished book with no buzz, no sales figures, no reviews, no list placement is not exactly a book that's going to land a translation agent.
So can you talk kind of as a way, I'm still keeping an eye on the questions, but as a way to kind of encapsulate what we've been talking about, can you just talk about if somebody's listening, like me, is listening to this conversation and saying, oh, this sounds really good, and I have books, they're well reviewed, whatever. What would you recommend people assess before they decide if they want to pursue these kinds of rights? And then what steps would they take, especially if they're ALLi members, what steps would they take in order to pursue those?
Well, ALLi authors know what they're doing, and they make strategic career judgments all the time. And they should look at their portfolio of books and say, am I exploiting these rights as best I can? Do I need an agent to do it? And should I shop my audio and translation rights, etc.? And if they make that decision, they should put together a sales package. Hi, my name is Jane or Joe, and I've got 12 books, and here's my level of success, and here are the licenses I've already made, and here's the money I've made, and here are the queries I get, and I'm interested in finding somebody to do X, Y, and Z for me. And you go into the marketplace. You can submit to us, of course, and to any other number of agents that are active in the rights and the licensing arena, and you will pursue finding a partner that matches up with your strategic and your financial and your creative goals.
And can you share a little more specifics about, like when you're talking about someone has decent sales or ranks or reviews, can you attach some numbers to that?
I'd be reluctant to, because it varies so dramatically by genre. We'd have to talk about the three formats. Are they strong in all three formats? Which countries are they strong in? How much money do they actually make on a monthly basis? How many units have they sold? How many books are out? How long have they been out? It's really like, forensic accounting. You put together an entire picture of how this person's career is going. The indies know that. They have that. And but I wouldn't really want to come up with an arbitrary generalization that in fact wouldn't really tell people anything precise enough to be truly valuable.
We have a question from Karen, and this is I don't think specific to the rights conversation, but you were talking about the importance of having audio, so I think that would be a good follow-up to that. Karen says, as an author making very modest margins, is it better to make a poor audiobook on the cheap or not at all?
Again, that's a conceptual question I can't really answer. You have to look at your annual budget and decide what makes the most sense for you financially. If we're talking, $2,000 or $3,000 for a book that you don't think is going to sell more than a couple of hundred units a year, I don't exactly see that. I think better to get your ebook numbers up to the point where you're accreting an audience. If ebook is the flagship, if that's the format that's got to help you emerge, then I would really concentrate on that and do everything I could to get my numbers up. It's a casino anyway. And it's a casino where you want to make smart bets. So I would be cautious about spending money where you don't feel that you've got that traction yet. Remember, discovery, which is key to the whole business, is a very dicey thing. It's not easy to get discovered. And just having a book up on ACX or on a platform with no real potential for discovery is not exactly a good strategy compared to reaching the point where it makes more financial sense because you're selling X units and you've got a couple more books coming and et cetera, et cetera.
A follow-up to the good sales question from Gregory. How do agents view Kickstarter sales versus ongoing retailer sales? Is the execution of a successful Kickstarter considered a significant positive?
I would say yes. I mean, I don't want to generalize. We think Kickstarter is a good thing. It's not easy to integrate Kickstarter success with publishing success because it's really like, a separate domain. An author that sells 10,000 hardcover copies at $25 a copy, that's a success by any measure. But they've done it in, this isolated environment that, no retail sales, no list placements, no reviews, and they've just done it on their own. I think it's great. But it's hard to integrate that into what it would mean in publishing success. People are crossing over from Kickstarter success to mainstream success and vice versa. So I think it's definitely there. It's real. It's good. It's going to keep happening. But it's not easy to point to Kickstarter and say, this person is going to do well in full distribution. Kickstarter is basically a fan-based publishing model. And to go from fan-based to general distribution, it's just very hard to assess what that would look like.
Yeah. I just want to let people know that Kaylee is putting some links to resources in the chat there. How authors self-publishing rights, publication guides, publishing guides. So don't overlook the information that's in the chat. And we also had another question. This is from Stephen. One of my books is being translated into both Chinese and French. Anything special that one should keep in mind while working with publishers and translators? Do I own the translation rights? Or how would he go about doing that? What would be the red flags?
Well, usually you would not own the translation rights. Usually either the foreign publisher owns it or the translator owns it or a combination of both. So that unless you commission the translation and specifically have in that document where you commission the translation and pay for the translation that you own it. So you would not own the translation. I don't think that's that big a deal because you don't really want to pay for it. But that is something to be concerned about. And there are countries, especially in Europe, that have droit moral laws that say you can own the translation. I believe Germany has the strongest droit moral law where you cannot deprive a translator of the copyright to the translation. So there are different deals that are worked out. Sometimes the translator will sell you the translation after it reverts to them, or there'll be some kind of joint ventures kind of thing going on. But unless you specifically put a translator in a work-for-hire contract and pay for the translation and own it, you will not own the translation. When the book reverts, you can try to buy it or ask the new publisher to relicense it. Or, there are a couple of pathways here. But one pathway that, for the most part, will be closed is any notion that you own the translation. You will not own the translation.
we're getting to the end of our time. So I thought an interesting way to wrap up, Ethan, might be for you to share is your agency. Are there any specific things that your agency is specifically looking for or interested in?
Well, we're commercial fiction people. We really love storytellers. There's no genre that we're not interested in. So we're very big on, fantasy, romantasy, science fiction, romance, mystery, thriller. That's really our bread and butter. We do some kids' books as well, and an exciting nonfiction project would interest us. But we are very much interested in the career novelist, regardless of where you live and what your career has been like. If you're emerging in fiction, in any of the genres, we'd be interested in you. And we would certainly hope to sell translation and audio. We certainly would look for print only if that's possible. We certainly would help you field any of the queries you get for any rights that come your way. Done a lot of book box deals lately. So it's really our goal is the career novelist, long-term representation. That's really our goal.
Fantastic. Well, I also just want to second Kaylee's note here that if anyone has any additional questions about rights licensing, you can submit them to ALLi via info@allianceindependentauthors.org, or ask your questions in the forum for the ALLi members and advisors. And Ethan will also be dropping into the ALLi forum here quarterly to answer your questions live. So Ethan, thank you so much. It's been such a lovely conversation. I appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate everyone else who joined, and especially those who asked questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you to all the guests that listened, and look forward to hearing more, and good luck with your career in all of its elements.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now. Bye.